I want you to put yourself in a very specific, visceral place right now. Just really picture this. It is the summer of 1942.
Right in the thick of the Second World War.
Exactly. And you are high up in the Indian Himalayas, standing at roughly 16,500 feet above sea level.
Which, just for context, is about 5,000 meters. It's incredibly high.
Yeah, and up here, the environment is just actively hostile to human biology. I mean, the air holds roughly half the oxygen you would normally get at sea level.
So literally every single breath you take is a conscious labor.
Right. If you aren't acclimated, you are dealing with this crushing headache, nausea, and just a really deep systemic exhaustion.
It's awful. And there is a thin, constant wind up there that just cuts right through you.
Oh, and it has this eerie, hollow sound to it, because there are no trees, no buildings, absolutely nothing for it to bounce off of.
You're just totally exposed.
You are, and you're walking on scree, which is basically this unstable slope of loose, jagged rock fragments.
They just slide and crunch under your boots with every single step.
Yeah, and perhaps the most striking thing about this entire environment is the absolute unnerving lack of life.
It really is a dead zone. I mean, once you get above the snow line in that specific part of the Himalayas, you just leave the biosphere completely behind.
Like nothing survives up there.
No, there are no birds overhead. There are 0 insects in the dirt, no vegetation. You are utterly alone in this freezing, desolate expanse of gray rock and white sky.
It's the kind of place your body just actively rebels against.
Absolutely. You are not meant to be there, and your biology is screaming at you that you are trespassing.
Exactly, but you are there anyway, because in this scenario, you are an ordinary forest ranger, and you are on a routine but highly tense patrol in what is today the Indian state of Uttarakhand.
Right, because it's 1942.
Yeah.
Which means there's a massive global war raging far below you. British India was deeply, deeply paranoid at the time about the possibility of a Japanese flanking maneuver through the mountains.
Or even just a network of Axis spies.
Right, exactly. So your job right now is to just walk the high country.
Your task is simply to observe the landscape, to note what the melting snow and the retreating ice give back to the world each short summer.
Just making sure the high passes are empty.
So you are navigating this massive, jagged terrain, and eventually you arrive at a glacial lake. It's called Roopkund.
And the funny thing is, despite the grand name of a lake, it's really tiny.
Oh, it's so small. It is barely the size of a village pond.
Just sitting at the bottom of this massive crater of rock, still half-skinned with ice from the long winter.
It's basically just a little frozen puddle huddled in the shadow of these towering, snow-capped peaks.
Yeah, if you weren't actively looking for it, you could easily walk right past it.
Right. But you walk up to the rocky shore of this pond, and you just stop cold, because the ice has retreated just enough in the summer sun to lay something completely incomprehensible bare.
Something that just shouldn't be there.
Not at all. Scattered across the shallow edges of the water and heaped among the rocks on the shore are human skeletons.
And not just one or two.
No, hundreds of them. Everywhere you look, there are skulls, ribs, broken long bones, femurs, spines.
And because of the extreme freeze-drying cold of this altitude, they aren't just bare, bleached bones either.
No, they're mummified. Many of them still have scraps of ancient leather clinging to them.
Some still have preserved human flesh and freeze-dried hair.
It is a mass of the dead, ringing this tiny pond like some crowd that gathered here once and just never left.
And if you are that forest ranger in 1942, standing there all alone in the wind, your mind just desperately scrambles for a rational explanation.
Right, you're trying to make it make sense.
Exactly. You're living in the middle of the Second World War. Paranoia is the baseline.
Oh, totally.
So the immediate logical assumption, really the only thing that makes any sense of a mass grave of this scale in an uninhabited, unmapped border region, is that you are looking at a military disaster.
You think, oh man, this is it. The invasion is real. This is a lost patrol. Or an entire army swallowed up by the mountain passes trying to flank Allied forces.
It has to be soldiers, right? Because what else could possibly explain hundreds of able-bodied people dying together in the middle of absolutely nowhere?
You'd assume they were caught in an avalanche or froze to death in a blizzard while trying to sneak across the border.
But then the ranger looks closer, and that entirely logical assumption shatters almost immediately.
Because there are no rifles, there are no canteens, no modern military uniforms, no brass buttons, no dog tags, no radios.
There's absolutely nothing from the 20th century at this lake.
Nothing. Whoever these people were, they didn't die last winter. They have been there for a very, very long time.
And there are far too many of them for this to be a simple, localized hiking accident.
Which just leaves you standing at the edge of this freezing water, entirely alone, completely unmoored from history. Your brain literally cannot process what your eyes are seeing.
And that profound disorientation is exactly what we're exploring today.
Yes, today we're taking a deep dive into the skeleton lake of Roopkund. We are going to try and make sense of this mass grave using everything we have.
And we really have pulled together a massive stack of sources for this deep dive.
We're looking at historical accounts of the region, the records of living local folklore, the data from a major 2004 radiocarbon expedition, and most crucially, a bombshell 2019 DNA study published in the journal Nature Communications.
A study that completely, and I mean completely, upended everything we thought we knew.
It really did. But before we get into the weeds, I think it is really important to set the emotional stage for you right now as you listen to this.
Yeah, because if you are used to deep dives where science swoops in, processes the evidence, and just cleanly solves a historical mystery, well, you need to radically adjust your expectations.
This is absolutely not a story of a mystery solved.
Not even close. The prevailing feeling of this deep dive is going to be one of altitude-thin, creeping disbelief.
I love that phrase, creeping disbelief.
It's the only way to describe it. What we are going to explore is how modern science, armed with literally every instrument and analytical tool available to the 21st century, took 80 years to finally open this mass grave.
And instead of giving us a neat, tidy answer, it took away the only answers we had. It made the mystery infinitely stranger.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the sheer, wrong-footing physical reality of Roopkund.
Because for decades after that initial 1942 discovery, the physical description of the lake was really the only thing anyone could say about it.
We are in the Garhwal Himalayas, sitting in a valley near the Nanda Gunti and Trishul Massif.
Trishul being this massive three-peaked mountain named after the trident of the god Shiva.
Right. And as we established, the site is about 16,500 feet up. But the contrast that makes this site so initially baffling is the scale.
It's the ratio of the geography to the human tragedy.
Yeah.
We were surrounded by this massive, sprawling, towering mountain range.
The sheer verticality of the Himalayas is overwhelming.
Exactly. But the lake itself, the epicenter of this entire mystery, is minuscule. It's barely 130 feet across.
It's a puddle in a rocky depression. Yes. Yet, packed into this tiny, highly localized area are an astonishing number of human remains. The estimates of the dead at Roopkund range from 300 to 800 individuals.
And let's actually explain why that is an estimate, because honestly, if you told me there were bodies trapped in a pond, my first question would be, well, why didn't someone just count the skulls?
Right. Why do we have this massive margin of error of 500 people?
Yeah.
It's a crucial point, and we have to explicitly clarify why this is an estimate and not a hard census.
And the reason for that is deeply tragic in its own right, honestly.
It really is. Over the decades following the discovery in 1942, this site was not treated like a crime scene.
It wasn't sealed off behind yellow police tape?
No, it was utterly exposed to the severe elements, and worse, it was exposed to people.
The bones have been constantly disturbed by shifting glacial ice?
Right? By the ice, by seasonal freezing and thawing, and by rockfalls. Plus, they've been handled, studied, and moved by early amateur explorers who didn't use proper archaeological grid systems.
They just kind of rummaged around.
Exactly. And unfortunately, they have been carried off by trekkers as morbid souvenirs for 80 years.
So the site has just been bleeding evidence.
Bleeding evidence is a great way to put it. When we say 300 to 800, we are talking about a scattered, highly fragmented biological archive that has been steadily shifting and degrading.
You have a femur over here, half a pelvis over there, a skull rolled between some rocks.
Right. Paleontologists and anthropologists have tried to extrapolate the total number based on the concentration of bones found in specific survey areas, but we just cannot give you a hard number because the physical evidence itself has been physically drifting away.
But even at the absolute low end of that estimate, let's just say 300 people, the sheer scale of it is just impossible to process given the location.
It makes no sense.
None. Imagine hiking through a desolate, frozen wasteland where your lungs are burning for air. You are exhausted, your muscles are cramping, you are fighting off altitude sickness.
And suddenly you crest a ridge and look down into a rocky bowl.
And you find the equivalent of a crowded movie theater of people just lying dead in a frozen pond.
You'd honestly think your oxygen-starved brain was hallucinating.
Yeah.
It makes zero geographical sense.
Not at all.
And what's fascinating here, and what troubled early researchers the most, is the physical nature of the site itself. We keep calling it a mass grave, but technically, this is not a traditional grave at all.
Right, because nobody is actually buried.
None of them. There is no dirt overturned. There are no shovels, no picks, no tools indicating an attempt to dig into the permafrost or the rock.
There are no religious markers, no cairns, no monuments.
It is literally just a barren, rocky shore that hundreds of people came to, died at, and were left on in the open air for centuries.
That is why it rightfully earned the names Skeleton Lake and Mystery Lake in the press back in the 1950s.
Because for a very long time, scientists could only stare at it and shrug.
There were hundreds of dead preserved in this terrifyingly vivid way by the ice. You still had fingerprints, you still had woven hair.
But there was no historical record of a battle, no record of a lost migration, no written documentation of a tragedy of this magnitude in that specific remote location.
But human beings absolutely hate an informational vacuum.
Oh, we loathe it.
It's deeply ingrained in our psychology. We just cannot stand a mystery without an answer.
So true.
So, when faced with hundreds of unexplained bodies on a mountain, and official history doesn't have an answer for you, local culture usually steps in to provide one.
And that leads us to the first major attempt to explain the lake, long before modern DNA testing was a reality.
Right. And this brings us into the realm of local folklore and tradition, because while the rest of the world and the British colonial authorities were completely baffled by the discovery in 1942.
The local communities of the Garhwal region actually had a narrative that seemed to fit the evidence perfectly.
They didn't see it as an inexplicable mystery. They saw it as a historical tragedy that had been passed down through song and story.
Yes, the folklore surrounding Nanda Devi. Nanda Devi is a highly revered mountain goddess in the region, the patron goddess of Uttarakhand.
And this is a really crucial piece of geographical context here. The Lake of Roopkund isn't just randomly placed in the wilderness.
No, it actually sits directly on the high route of a real, living, ancient pilgrimage called the Nanda Devi Raj Jat.
This isn't just some forgotten goat path. It's a deeply sacred route that has been walked by Hindu devotees for generations.
It happens every 12 years, it spans hundreds of miles, and it culminates in these incredibly high, dangerous Himalayan passes.
And within the living tradition of this specific pilgrimage, there is a very specific, detailed legend.
Right. According to the lore, sometime in the distant past, a king named Jazdaval from the kingdom of Kannauj, along with his pregnant queen Balampa, embarked on this sacred pilgrimage.
And because he was a king, he didn't just walk humbly with a walking stick.
Oh no. He brought a massive, ostentatious retinue. We were talking soldiers, servants, musicians, and dancing girls.
Just a full royal procession dragging its way up to 16,000 feet.
Exactly. But the core of the legend is that they did not treat the sacred landscape with the required reverence.
Right, because a pilgrimage to Nanda Devi demands strict austerity, purity, and silence in the high mountains.
But instead, the king's party engaged in loud revelry. The musicians played, the dancers danced.
And worse, the queen gave birth in the sacred precincts, which, according to the tradition, deeply polluted the spiritual purity of the space.
They profoundly offended the mountain goddess, and in her wrath, Nanda Devi struck them down on the heights, but not with a regular storm.
No, she hit them with a highly specific supernatural weapon.
A storm of iron-hard hail.
The hailstones were said to be as hard as iron, raining down from the sky and wiping out the entire arrogant procession in a single, brutal, inescapable event.
Now, I want to be really clear here. We are treating this folklore not as some quaint, dismissible superstition.
Right. This is a respected, living tradition that holds immense spiritual weight for the people of Uttarakhand.
And what is so incredible about this part of the deep dive is how modern science eventually interacted with this exact legend.
Because fast forward to the early 2000s, the world wants answers.
So, researchers, supported by National Geographic, mount a major scientific expedition to Roopkund in 2004.
They aren't just looking around this time. They bring in radiocarbon dating technology.
They bring in forensic anthropologists to examine the physical architecture of the bones.
And they are looking to see if there is any material evidence that might give a clue as to who these people were and exactly how they died.
And the findings from that 2004 expedition were, frankly, stunning.
They felt like a massive breakthrough, didn't they?
They absolutely did. First, they tackled the timeline. The radiocarbon dating placed many of the deaths around the 9th century CE.
Specifically, clustering around 850 CE.
Yes.
And just to pause on that, how exactly does radiocarbon dating give us that specific year? Because I think a lot of people hear carbon dating and just assume a computer prints out a year, but it's actually this fascinating biological clock, right?
It is a biological clock, exactly. It's based on carbon-14, which is a radioactive isotope of carbon.
Okay.
While you are alive, you are constantly absorbing carbon-14 from the atmosphere through the food you eat and the air you breathe. The ratio of regular carbon to carbon-14 in your body is essentially equal to the environment around you.
But the moment you die, you stop absorbing it.
Precisely. And because carbon-14 is radioactive, it begins to slowly decay at a known, completely predictable rate, its half-life.
So by measuring how much carbon-14 is left in the bone collagen of these skeletons,
And then comparing it to historical tree ring data that tells us what the atmosphere looked like in the past, scientists can calculate backward to the exact century that person stopped eating and breathing.
that is so cool. So the data comes back and it points squarely to 850 CE.
Right. We are talking about a genuinely ancient event, roughly 1,100 years ago, not a modern WWII disaster.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The dating wasn't even the wildest part. The detail that really made everyone lean in, the detail that generated international headlines and television documentaries, was the forensic analysis of the skulls themselves.
Right. Forensic anthropologists meticulously examined the skulls of many of the victims, and they found something incredibly consistent and highly unusual.
Many of the skulls featured short, deep, rounded depression fractures.
And let's explain what that looks like, because this isn't a crack from a rock fall.
No, it's not. If you are caught in a rock fall, the trauma is massive, jagged, and random,
Yes.
right? A boulder crushes the whole skull, or you have massive sharing fractures.
Exactly. But these were localized, rounded dents, almost like the bone had been struck by a cricket ball.
Wow.
Furthermore, these were definitively perimortem injuries.
Meaning they happened at the exact time of death, not after.
Correct. When bone is alive and fresh, it reacts differently to impact than dry, dead bone does.
Right, it bends slightly before it breaks.
Exactly, leaving a very specific kind of fracture pattern. The scientists could clearly see these strikes happened while the bone was fresh. But the most crucial detail of all, the detail that connected everything, was the trajectory.
Based on the angle of the depressions and the mechanics of the fractures, forensic experts concluded that these fatal blows were delivered almost exclusively from above.
Something heavy, rounded, and hard rained down on the heads and shoulders of these people from the sky.
So if you're following along, this is where the puzzle pieces seem to snap together perfectly. The local legend, passed down for a millennium, said the goddess struck them down with a storm of iron-hard hail.
And now, in 2004, you have forensic scientists looking into microscopes and saying, well, we have hundreds of people who died around the 9th century, and the physical evidence on their skulls strongly indicates they were pelted from above by heavy, spherical objects.
The oral legend and the hard scientific evidence seemed to perfectly, flawlessly shake hands.
It was a beautiful moment. It is incredibly rare in archaeology for hard data to so cleanly validate oral tradition.
The scientific community, the media, and the public largely embraced this narrative. It was satisfying. It respected the local culture while utilizing modern forensics.
It just worked.
I mean, if I'm reading this in 2004, I'm thinking, case closed. We can all go home. We have one doomed party of royal pilgrims. We have one terrible afternoon high in the mountains. And we have one freak killer hailstorm around 850 CE.
It all fits perfectly.
Yeah.
It explains the sheer numbers of bodies. It explains the location right on the pilgrimage route. It explains the blunt force trauma to the skulls.
It is a completely tidy, neatly wrapped up historical mystery.
And it is incredibly convincing. You can entirely see why that consensus held strong for 15 solid years. It became the textbook answer for Roopkund. But if we step back and connect this to the bigger picture of how scientific inquiry actually works, we have to recognize a massive load-bearing assumption built into that neat little story.
A structural flaw that no one could see until the technology evolved.
Exactly.
I know where this is going, but break it down. What was the assumption holding that 2004 story together?
Well, the killer hailstorm hypothesis and the legend of the arrogant king only works if everyone in that lake died at the exact same time.
Right.
The entire story hinges entirely on the idea of a single, catastrophic, localized event. One afternoon, one storm, One group of travelers.
If these people didn't die together, the narrative of a single royal procession struck down by sudden wrath completely falls apart.
Completely.
Which brings us to the structural hinge of our entire deep dive. The moment where modern science, specifically the rapidly advancing field of ancient DNA analysis, walked up to this perfectly tidy 15-year-old consensus, tapped it on the shoulder, and completely pulled the rug out from under it.
Yes. We need to talk about the 2019 Nature Communications study.
Let's do it.
This is where the story shifts from a solved historical curiosity into something deeply unsettling and structurally bizarre. By 2019, the technology for extracting and reading ancient DNA had progressed light years beyond what was possible in 2004.
It wasn't even the same ballpark.
Yeah. Exactly. So an international team of geneticists, anthropologists, and archaeologists, including researchers from the Birbal Sahni Institute of Paleosciences in India and Harvard Medical School, decided to apply genome-wide sequencing to the remains at Roopkund.
And we really need to explain why genome-wide sequencing is such a massive leap forward. Because previously, scientists often relied on mitochondrial DNA, but that's a very restricted view, right?
Very restricted. Mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, is only passed down from mother to child.
So it's incredibly useful for tracing direct maternal lineages deep into the past.
But it ignores half of your family tree. It tells you nothing about your father's side. Genome-wide sequencing, on the other hand, looks at the nuclear DNA. That's the genetic material inherited from both parents.
It provides a vastly richer, infinitely more detailed blueprint of an individual's total ancestry.
It really does.
I want to use an analogy here to help visualize what this team was actually attempting, because extracting nuclear DNA from bones that have been sitting in a freezing, thawing puddle for centuries isn't just taking a cheek swab.
Not at all.
Imagine taking 3 different encyclopedias, putting them through an industrial paper shredder, burying those shreds in mud and ice for 1,000 years, and then digging them up and trying to tape just the pages from one specific encyclopedia back together.
That is a very apt description.
That is essentially the genetic puzzle they were facing. The DNA is highly degraded, chopped into tiny fragments, and contaminated by bacteria and the DNA of the people who handled the bones over the decades.
That is exactly the challenge.
Yeah.
It requires immense computational power and pristine laboratory environments to filter out the modern contamination and reassemble the ancient genetic code.
But they did it.
They did. The team successfully extracted and sequenced the genome-wide data of roughly 38 distinct individuals from the lake.
Wow.
And alongside this sequencing, they ran new, highly precise radiocarbon dates on those exact specific remains, utilizing newer calibration curves for much better accuracy.
And the tidy, comforting story of the single hailstorm detonates almost immediately upon reading the first page of the results.
Completely detonates. Because the DNA proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the skeletons at Roopkund were not one people.
They were not a single retinue of a king? Or a single cohesive group of pilgrims who traveled and died together?
No. The 38 sequenced individuals fractured cleanly into at least 3 completely distinct genetic groups.
Okay, let's break those groups down one by one, because this is where my brain genuinely starts to hurt trying to comprehend the logistics. Group 1.
Group 1 is the largest cohort of the sequenced remains. As you might logically expect, given the location deep in the Indian Himalayas, this group had South Asian ancestry.
Their genetic markers align with modern populations from the Indian subcontinent.
Exactly.
Okay, so that makes sense. But the ancestry wasn't the shock for Group 1, was it?
No, the shock wasn't their ancestry. It was their radiocarbon dates.
Right, remember the assumption? Everyone died in one storm.
The new, precise radiocarbon dating revealed that this South Asian group did not die in a single afternoon. In fact, they didn't even die in the same century.
Wait, really?
Yes. The dating proved that these individuals were deposited at the lake across multiple, distinct, separate death events spanning a 300-year period, roughly from the 7th to the 10th centuries CE.
Wait, let's make sure you caught that. If you're listening to this, you're probably running through the same mental checklist I am. The people of South Asian descent didn't all die in one storm. They died over 3 centuries.
Let that sink in.
That means people were making this brutal trek, arriving at this tiny lake, dying in large numbers, and then a century later, a completely different group of South Asian travelers would climb up to the exact same lake.
And they would die, joining the bones of the previous group.
It wasn't one freak event. It was a centuries-long recurring nightmare.
Exactly. It fundamentally breaks the single storm hypothesis.
Now, this doesn't completely invalidate the Nanda Devi folklore or the 2004 forensics entirely, right?
No, not entirely. The hailstorm might very well explain one of those death events in the 9th century. Perhaps the specific individuals with the cranial fractures really were caught in a severe, lethal weather event.
But a single hailstorm cannot explain a 300-year pattern of mass death in the exact same spot.
Right. The hail doesn't explain the people who died 100 years before the hail or 100 years after.
But as wild as that 300-year spread is, the South Asian group wasn't even the biggest shock of the paper.
No, it wasn't. Let's look at the second cluster, Group 2. This is where the scientific community collectively gasped when the paper was published.
Okay, brace yourself for this one.
The DNA from the second group of remains, about 14 individuals in the sample, did not point to South Asia. It pointed definitively to Eastern Mediterranean ancestry.
Wait, Mediterranean people at a remote Himalayan lake. Are you going to tell me Group 2 wasn't just a different nationality, but from a completely different era?
Yes, I am.
But first, let me stop you on the geography. I really want to emphasize this. We're talking about remains found at 16,000 feet in the Indian Himalayas bordering Tibet.
Right.
And the nuclear DNA is saying these 14 people are genetically closest to the present-day inhabitants of Crete and the Mediterranean region.
Yes. People whose genetic home is thousands of miles away across mountain ranges, deserts, and oceans somehow ended up lying dead in a tiny glacial lake in India.
That is just, it's hard to even picture.
And you were right to guess about the era, because if their geography wasn't shocking enough, their timeline is the real temporal gut punch of this study.
Walk us through the dates for Group 2.
The radiocarbon dating for this Eastern Mediterranean group showed that they died roughly 1,000 years later than the South Asian group.
1,000 years.
Yes, they died somewhere between the 17th and 19th centuries CE. We are looking at a time frame right around the year 1800.
That is just staggering, 1,000 years later.
It completely reshapes the reality of Roopkund. The site is no longer a single event. It is a geographic magnet for tragedy spanning a millennium.
And just to completely round out the data, there was also a third group identified in the study, right?
Yes, Group 3 consisted of a single, lone individual who possessed Southeast Asian ancestry, also dating to roughly the same later period as the Mediterranean group.
So let's map this out. We have South Asians arriving and dying over the course of 300 years. Then the lake goes silent for a massive 1,000-year gap, just an icy graveyard sitting undisturbed in the sky.
Yes.
Then suddenly, around the year 1800, a group of people from the Eastern Mediterranean and one person from Southeast Asia somehow show up at this exact same puddle and die.
This lake wasn't one tragedy. It was a destination for death.
And you can imagine the researchers at Harvard and the Birbal Sahni Institute scrambling to find some logical, biological shortcut to explain this.
Oh, absolutely. When you have disparate groups of people dying in the exact same localized spot over vastly different periods, the immediate scientific reflex is to look for illness.
Right. Did they all wander up to this specific lake and die of a localized plague? Or did they bring a disease with them that killed them en masse upon arrival?
Right, like maybe the lake water was fundamentally toxic, or it was a known quarantine zone where sick people were sent to die.
But the 2019 study explicitly tested for that and ruled it out.
They did. Because they had the genome-wide data, they could screen the genetic material for the presence of shared bacterial pathogens.
They were looking for ancient DNA from bacteria like Yersinia pestis, which causes the plague, or Salmonella.
Exactly.
But wait, how do you even find ancient plague DNA in a skeleton?
You usually look inside the teeth.
The teeth.
Yeah, the pulp cavity of a tooth is highly vascularized in life, meaning blood flows through it. If a person dies of a blood-borne pathogen, the DNA of that pathogen gets trapped in the tooth pulp, which acts like a tiny, sealed, bony vault for centuries.
That is incredible.
The researchers checked these vaults. They found absolutely nothing. There was no evidence of a plague, epidemic, or shared fatal illness linking these deaths.
So disease is out.
Right.
What about starvation or, a shared lifestyle?
Ruled out as well. They
Oh.
conducted isotopic analysis on the bones.
Okay, we need to pause and explain isotopes.
Yeah.
Because this is one of the coolest parts of archaeological science. So your bones are basically a slow printing receipt of everything you've eaten and drank over the last decade of your life, right?
That is a perfect way to describe it.
And by reading that receipt, scientists can tell if you grew up eating marine fish in the Mediterranean or millet in South Asia.
Exactly. Specifically, scientists look at the ratios of carbon-13 and nitrogen-15 isotopes trapped in the bone collagen.
Because different plants photosynthesize differently.
Right. Wheat and barley, which are C3 plants, leak a different carbon signature than millet and sorghum, which are C4 plants.
Got it.
Similarly, if you eat a lot of marine fish, your nitrogen isotope levels will spike compared to someone who only eats terrestrial animals.
Okay, so the researchers read the slow printing receipts of these skeletons.
And the isotopic signatures confirm the DNA findings perfectly. The South Asian group had diets based on C4 plants like millet, typical of the Indian subcontinent.
And the Mediterranean group?
They had isotopic signatures consistent with C3 plants like wheat and a completely different terrestrial diet.
So they shared no diseases, they shared no food sources, they shared no genetic ancestry.
And in the case of the Mediterranean group, they didn't even share the same millennium.
It is such an eerie, haunting reality when you actually picture it. Think about those Mediterranean travelers in the year 1800. They arrive at this lake, 16,000 feet in the sky, and they die there, maybe of exposure, maybe of a localized storm. We still don't know the exact mechanism of their death.
We don't.
But they die never knowing that 1,000 years earlier, hundreds of other people had done the exact same thing in the exact same spot.
They were just laying their bodies down at a rocky shore that was already a 1,000-year-old graveyard, and they had absolutely no idea.
Which brings us to the massive void at the center of this story. Because the DNA brilliantly answered the who, and the highly calibrated radiocarbon dating answered the when.
But all of this advanced technology completely failed to answer the biggest question of all.
Why here?
Why here?
If you are listening to this, you're probably screaming at your device. You're demanding an explanation. Why on earth were a group of 14 people from the eastern Mediterranean and the high Himalayas in the year 1800?
It's the ultimate question.
Were they travelers? Merchants trying to establish some incredibly misguided high-altitude trade route into Tibet? Were they mercenaries or soldiers of fortune caught on the wrong side of a border?
Or a lost group of wandering foreign pilgrims who somehow integrated into the local Hindu Nanda Devi pilgrimage?
I mean, what is the answer?
The frustrating, fascinating answer is that there is no historical record whatsoever explaining their presence. None.
Zero.
Historians and archaeologists have scoured the archives, the local Indian histories, the colonial records of the British Raj from the 18th and 19th centuries. There is absolutely zero documentation of a group of Mediterranean people, whether from Crete, Greece, or the Levant, traveling to Roopkund in the 17th, 18th, or 19th centuries.
So what does this all mean? We know the biological who, and we roughly know the temporal when, but the why is just an echoing void.
The 2019 study explicitly states in its conclusion that it cannot explain their presence.
All the things I just listed, the merchants, the lost pilgrims, the mercenaries, that is pure speculation on my part to try and fill the void. We have to caveat that strongly. We literally do not know why they were there.
This raises a really important philosophical question about the nature of science itself and what we as a society expect from it.
Oh, absolutely.
We have this built-in assumption that new data, new technology like genome sequencing and isotopic analysis will act like a magic key in a lock. We expect science to give us a neat bow to tie around a historical mystery so we can file it away on a shelf and say, we understand that now. The world makes sense.
Right. We want the X-ray machine. We want the results to be clear, binary, and comforting. We want the mystery solved.
Exactly. But Roopkund teaches us a harder, colder truth about archaeology and history. Science is exceptionally good at dismantling false certainties.
It really is. The DNA took away the comforting theory of the WWII soldiers.
It dismantled the unifying theory of the single 9th century hailstorm wiping out one royal party.
It fragmented the tidy local legend into something far more complex and sprawling.
But science doesn't always owe us an explanation to replace the one it just destroyed. Sometimes it just leaves us standing in a much larger, darker room than we thought we were in. The data gives us the coordinates, but it doesn't give us the plot.
I really want you to try and put yourself in the shoes of that 1800s group for a second. Imagine the sheer logistics of that journey.
Walking halfway across the known world.
Leaving the shores of the Mediterranean, crossing continents, navigating unfamiliar cultures, languages, and terrains, and finally climbing 16,500 feet into the freezing, oxygen-starved sky of a Hindu pilgrimage route in the Himalayas.
What is driving you? What internal compulsion is so intensely strong that it pushes you to the absolute unforgiving edges of the earth?
Only to lay down in the freezing water and die among bones that were already ancient.
It's a profound mystery of human behavior, not just biology. But while we grapple with the past, we also have to talk about the physical reality of Roopkund right now, today.
Yeah, we do, because this isn't just a story about ancient history or 1800s travelers. It's a story about a ticking clock in the present day.
Right, let's look at the eroding archive.
Yeah.
Because the frozen lake the forest ranger found in 1942 is not the same lake that exists today.
No, it is fundamentally changing. The site is physically degrading at an alarming rate.
Climate change is having a dramatic, accelerated impact on the Himalayan environment. The glacial ice that preserved these remains for centuries, the deep freeze that kept the flesh, the hair, and the ancient DNA intact is melting faster and retreating further each year.
Which exposes more remains to the hard surface elements, the intense high-altitude UV radiation, the wind, and crucially, the daily freeze-thaw cycle.
Yes. When bone freezes and thaws repeatedly, it microfractures and physically destroys the biological material, degrading whatever DNA is left inside.
And it's not just the warming climate destroying the evidence, it's us.
Yes. The global fame of Skeleton Lake has unfortunately turned it into a major destination for trekkers and dark tourism.
And despite regional efforts to protect it and campaigns asking visitors to respect the site, people are walking away with the bones.
They are taking skulls, femurs, and artifacts as morbid souvenirs, sipping them into their backpacks and taking them home to sit on a shelf in a different country.
Which is just deeply tragic on multiple levels. First of all, on a purely human, ethical level, and while we aren't here to preach, this is a core part of the ongoing conversation in the region. Despite the ancient nature of this mystery, these are real human dead.
They deserve basic dignity.
They are lying in a majestic, sacred landscape on a pilgrimage route that is still deeply holy to the people who live in Uttarakhand today. The site is a cemetery, essentially. Their remains shouldn't be scattered in the backpacks of tourists.
And from a strictly scientific perspective, it is a catastrophic, irreplaceable loss. That lake is a biological archive of human history.
Those bones are a physical hard drive containing incredibly rare data about human migration, diet, disease, and movement over a millennium.
But that archive is quite literally eroding and being scattered to the wind at the exact moment our technology has finally evolved enough to actually read it.
Every skull or bone taken by a tourist is a page torn out of a historical book we just learned how to translate. Once a bone leaves that site and loses its context, its scientific value plummets.
It's a race against time to document and sequence what is left before the lake is entirely emptied of its secrets.
Let's briefly recap the dizzying, centuries-spanning trajectory we've been on in this deep dive. We started with the sheer terror and confusion of a 1942 wartime panic. A lone ranger finding hundreds of bodies in a frozen puddle and rationally assuming the worst of modern humanity.
Then we found incredible comfort in a 9th century myth. The angry goddess, the iron hailstorm, the perfect, satisfying alignment of ancient oral tradition, and early 2004 forensic and radiocarbon dating.
We felt like we truly understood it. The world breathed a sigh of relief and filed the mystery away as solved.
We did. And then the 2019 DNA study dropped like a bomb.
And we ended up with a millennium-spanning genetic jigsaw puzzle that we still can't put together. South Asians arriving and dying across 3 distinct centuries. A massive 1,000-year gap of eerie silence.
And then travelers from the shores of the Mediterranean and a lone individual from Southeast Asia arriving in the early 1800s to die on top of the ancient dead for reasons we simply cannot fathom.
Which leaves us with a final lingering thought, one that builds on all this genetic and historical data, but stretches outward into human psychology.
I want you to think about that lone individual of Southeast Asian descent, or the 14 people from the Mediterranean. What is this deep, inexplicable human compulsion to walk to the absolute edges of the earth?
We as a species constantly leave traces of ourselves in places where we objectively do not belong.
And in doing so, we often completely erase the reasons we went there in the first place. We leave the bones, but not the story.
Wow, that hits hard. Think about your own life. If a future archaeologist 1,000 years from now found the digital or physical footprints of your life's most random travels, that time you drove 3 states over in the middle of the night just because you felt like it, or the strange, far-off places you've ended up for reasons you can barely remember today, would they be able to guess the why?
Or would you just be another inexplicable data point to them? Just another stranger on a frozen shore, leaving a mystery for someone else to untangle with tools that haven't even been invented yet.
It reminds us that humanity is infinitely complex, deeply driven, and often beautifully irrational. We don't just stay where we are born, we wander.
Sometimes standing at the absolute edge of human knowledge doesn't mean finding the answer. Sometimes it means accepting that we know more than we ever have in human history. We have sharper tools and better data, and yet we actually understand less.
The forest ranger in 1942 looked at the retreating ice, saw the bones, and knew he didn't understand what he was seeing. Today, we have the genome sequencing, we have the isotopes, we have the highly calibrated carbon dates. We are staring at that exact same ice. And fundamentally, we are just as lost as he was.
We really are.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the unknown. We will catch you on the next one.